See you. Okay. How on?
Right, you guys ready? Today we're going to be talking about innovation in enterprise, which is a bit like the abominable snowman. It's much talked about but never seen. So what I would like to do is I'd like to focus on incumbent businesses, because starting a startup is easy because you disrupt someone else's business. But in an incumbent business, we have revenue streams which are very hard to sacrifice for something new and uncertain. And that's kind of the focus I'd like to give it. So the first question, and I'll throw some of these to the panel and some of them to you individually, but the first question I'd like to throw to all of you is, does process make a difference? Who wants to start?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Absolutely. I think it's been said today, yesterday, ideas are cheap and easy. And in a company like ours, which has got 70,000 people, most of whom are engineers, there's plenty of ideas. So the question is, how do you capture those ideas and monetize them? So the process of doing that is fundamentally important to the future success of companies like ours.
And do you follow any specific processes?
So if you go back a few years, our innovation strategy was built by a partner. In the last couple of years, we've extended that to include invest and co-develop. And in each one of those, there's a methodology in terms of what we're building in our labs. We spend about $6 billion every year on 25,000 engineers. And even if you look at our investment strategies, which is not about acquisitions, which we do a lot of, it's about funding venture capital startups. We've actually now secured 2 rounds in Australia. So we have 40 funds around the world. And the way in which we do that is very strictly governed. So in each of those 5 pillars, there's a very sort of, there's a method behind what we're doing.
Okay. Shannon?
I think... Is working? Okay. I think process is quite important. I actually came to Amdocs from a startup. So I came from a very small organization that was acquired by a very large organization. And working in a small organization, I think I really enjoyed and benefited from that kind of free flow of innovation, ideas, working as part of a team. And coming to a large organization, I think that process is really critical to foster innovation. And I see it every day at Amdocs, because if we didn't have that process, we wouldn't be able to separate the day-to-day business and activities that must go on from fostering the innovation that's critical to our business. And I think from a process perspective, definitely how we look at innovation is that it has to be a multifaceted approach. It has to come from different angles. Certainly partnering is critical, and being in Israel and having access to the big startup community is very beneficial for us. Also fostering innovation internally so that we can actually benefit from the ideas that the engineers and the teams have, and having an environment where you can separate some of that innovative thinking out from the day-to-day activities so that people can fail, they can fail fast, they can grow, they can create and innovate, I think is also a critical element to having structure around how you drive innovation.
Okay, thanks. Nimrod, I guess you'd look at this from the outside as an investor in VC and see it a bit differently. What's your take on this?
First of all, I think that it very much matters what stage the innovation is. I think that the early stage, sometimes a process can kill innovation. More committees, more kind of like processes you have to go, kills innovation. At the early stage, you want people to try kind of like the craziest idea, to try fast, to fail fast, to be able to tweak the project and not get into too much of processes and approvals. So we love in early stage actually just go wild with whatever idea you have. But this early stage innovation which lacks a process is not that good in building a product. And what we learn actually with this tango that we dance between early stage companies and the large corporates, that bringing the process into the innovation leads that the great idea that you had turns into a product. Because turning something into the product have to take into account the integration, the ecosystem, the architecture, the processes, the monetization model, many others, even kind of like the supply chain, many other considerations you have to take into account when turning an early stage genius ideas into a product. And that's, I think, what we try to do working with big companies in turning these ideas into something which can be productized.
So looking at it from the outside, which enterprise do you think does it best? If I ask these two, they're going to say Amdocs and Cisco. So
I think John said beautifully earlier in his presentation the role of the multinationals in Israel. This is, I think, one of the secrets of Israel. We have 300 multinationals that operate in Israel. We actually get for our startup access to the roadmap of technology and the best minds in 300 corporations doing R&D. So we have to experiment a lot with these R&D centers, trying to think which is a good fit to our startups, to work together, to co-develop together. We've seen some marvelous kind of like approach from Intel, the way they works with the companies in Israel. Cisco works beautifully kind of like with the community in Israel. We see a lot of work done by EMC, Dell. Recently, we saw Alibaba, that is a co-investors with JVP, coming to Israel and actually embracing co-innovation with the community. So we see some companies actually eager to embrace startups, and it's not that easy, because in many of the large corporations, and we failed many times trying to work with large corporations to incorporate early-stage startups, and the cultural differences and the mentality differences were just that big that it was hard actually to incorporate the new product into the environment.
So
But some organizations do it well.
So let's come back to investing in startups, but let me ask Shannon and Kevin, your own company is excluded. When you look at organic innovation, which large enterprise would you pick as the one you look at for leadership?
Well, I think when we look at organic innovation, I think you really look at Google and what they do is constantly innovative and driving a culture of innovation. I think for me that's one that's obvious, right?
Okay, Kevin.
I would say definitely Google, but Amazon, which it's interesting. They're not as acquisitive. So a lot of people think innovation is about acquisition. They're very innovative in the way in which they're approaching the market. And Nimrod was talking about, sort of go wild with ideas. And I agree with that to a point. It's go wild, but for a certain purpose. The previous speaker, I'm sure, went wild with Genie, but they actually were trying to solve a problem. And I think the thing that Amazon's done really, really well is be very focused on that long-term objective and very innovative in getting there.
Right. So the last thing I want to ask Shannon and Kevin is, what percentage of revenue would your two companies spend on internal organic innovation? Put aside acquisition or funds or things like that.
Internal, it's probably about 12%.
But that's R&D. That's
and
evolution of your existing product
that's
line.
spending internal.
Right.
And are you talking about external?
I'm talking about true innovation, things that are going to disrupt your existing product line.
Would you include acquisitions?
No, that's what I've excluded.
Okay. So between acquisitions and internal is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. It's probably about 5%.
Okay. Shannon?
And I don't know the exact figures, but it's probably in around the same range, I would say. But I don't know the exact number.
Okay, so let's move on. We've established process is important, I think. But interestingly enough, the two examples that you both cited are companies that are not threatening their own revenues, so that kind of puts aside some of the argument. How do you see large organizations encouraging innovation internally? What do your organizations do? And Nimrod, you may want to comment on ones that you've seen. Let's start off, though, with Kevin.
I think it's got to start at the top, as we've seen in Australia. It's got to start at the top. I think the most senior people need to really message that the best ideas don't necessarily come from within the company. And this non-invented here has to really be embraced in the culture. And another key word is collaboration, collaborating outside of the company. So I think all of that is certainly within Cisco highly not just encouraged, but it's frowned upon if you don't, to that extent. So start at the top, very collaborative, and it's really got to be driven all the way through.
Okay. Shannon?
And I think I agree it has to start at the top, but I think also having a focused approach to how you drive innovation with your customers is also important. So we do a lot of internal innovation weeks, Innovator of the Year, and different programs to promote innovation internally. But we also work very closely with our customers. So customers that want access to startups that we engage with, customers that have specific business problems that they're trying to solve, and building an environment. And two good examples are the foundry that we built in Israel with AT&T, which is one of our largest customers, is a great environment for incubating new ideas. And there's a process around how we do it. They come with the latest business ideas. We bring in companies to address those. Sometimes we might address things internally, but in large part, we're bringing in vendors and startups from the community to help address those business problems. And then once we get to the point where we actually have a working prototype of the solution, they come in, their executives come, and they actually have panels to hear these startups present their capabilities. And some of those are then selected to incubate and form solutions that get delivered to AT&T ultimately. And we have a similar innovation center we run with Singtel. So I think connecting the startups and the innovation with real business problems is critical, because you're solving then something that is going to drive and is going to be needed by other customers as well in the market. And getting that customer engagement to help shape the idea, the concept, the development of it, the prototype, and give you a landing place for the technology ultimately. Because I think, we all know the challenge in startups is getting that first customer and securing the first customer. And so if you have a customer that's willing to partner with you, that's critical. And so I think that for us is a key part of our innovation strategy.
Okay. Nimrod?
Yes, I think there's a beautiful example to see in Israel in the fintech sector. We see both Bank Hapoalim and Bank Leumi, the two largest banks in Israel, that could be frightened by some of the fintech innovation, like peer-to-peer lending and some of the kind of like a new innovative model around fintech. But both of them actually created a very interesting innovation model. Both of them created some kind of like a fintech hub where they bring the startups and kind of like let their internal employees mingle with the startups and kind of like think about these ideas. They do it in a format of unconferences. Unconferences in a format that you don't have someone to set, okay, this is the person that should speak and that would be the topic, but rather get a kind of like a place and says, okay, that's a time slot. Anyone can talk about whatever topic they have in mind, and people are actually picking the slot they want to listen to. That's created a lot of kind of like discussion between those from the corporate and the new inventors about kind of like their ideas and brainstorming. Another thing is if you're really committed to get disruptive ideas that sometimes can challenge your own business model, to be incubated within, or to be kind of like having proof of concept. Many organizations kind of like try to get outside innovation saying, okay, we'll be a proof of concept for you or a beta site. Very few actually meet their promise and become a successful beta site, because very few are committed with the resources, the manpower, even the processes internally to incubate the startups. I think the banks in Israel did something beautifully. They set kind of like labs only for this kind of like collaboration, which is this disruptive collaboration. And another thing which I think is not less important, many times it's not about the technology, the innovation, but it's kind of like you need to challenge your business model, you need to change actually your revenue stream. Sometimes we saw that actually discussions with people coming from consulting firm and business model, trying to challenge kind of like the way you do business now, was as creative as the technology innovation that these companies were doing.
Okay, so we've heard from Kevin top down. We've heard from Shannon, it's about collaborating with your customer. We've heard from Nimrod about collaborating internally and having peer-to-peer discussion. What about talent, attracting talent? I've been managing scientists and engineers for 30 years, and frankly, they're a pain in the neck. They're generally eccentric, and they require a lot of management. And they're disruptive in many different ways in an organization. So how do you deal with that in your organizations? Kevin?
So what we're doing is building, first of all, as a pipeline for engineers, building relationships with universities. But how do we deal with them? I think managing engineers, as you very well know, is to a point, it's how much you pay them, but you know when they're complaining about the salary, it's something else going on. And generally, it's about stimulation and challenges. So we like to feed them lots of challenges, and there's no, I think, rule there. I think the art of engineering management is to work out which ones are, sort of the rebellious or innovative, and to feed them the big problems. And we do that. We do that pretty successfully.
Okay. Shannon?
I think we made a decision a few years ago to actually separate a strategic innovation group inside of our product organization. And I think, it's a challenge we all battle with is, how do you continue to drive innovation in the core of the products that you're delivering to your customers and provide that environment for innovation. So we actually developed an innovation group that deals with some of the strategic challenges that we have, and we feed those challenges to them. They actually sit in a different part of the office, in a different environment that's more open and collaborative and fosters that collaboration. And what happens is, again, it's back to process. It comes down to bringing ideas to the table, giving them the freedom to develop those ideas without the pressure of revenue targets and deliverables and whatnot, but then providing the environment to incubate and move those out into the core of the business. And we've had quite a lot of success taking internally generated ideas and moving them into the core product units. And then the people will follow those because that's their innovation and they want to see it successful. And it gives an environment to then move other people into that innovative group. And I think that that's been really critical for internal innovation as a way to keep the engineering talent.
Okay.
I think you were touching on the most important point now with innovation. There's a lack of talent. And to be honest, we have like a battle, HR battle at the moment, between the large corporates, the startups, the more established companies. They are fighting on talent. In Silicon Valley, and same in Tel Aviv, and same actually in all the innovation hubs around the world, there are too few people actually that are innovative in minds and that are kinds of entrepreneurs that all companies are fighting on the same talent pool. I've seen a marvelous company recently that is able to recognize from your LinkedIn profile whether you are unstable with your job position, whether you are likely to move. Just by the fact how many new contacts you made, how many times you were looking for a new encounter. Just the same, by the way, that OkCupid doing with dating. They know that you're just about to leave your partner or seeking for a new partner, just by big data indications of the way you act. They are now traded at $1.5 billion, this company, because they understand with the shortage of talent and talent pool, everybody competing on them, you need to know when there's the right time to actually try to attract this new talent. And to be honest, I don't think that the innovators within the large corporates are necessarily the same innovators we see with startups. It's a different talent pool, and sometimes trying to take a great entrepreneur and after acquiring the company says, okay, stay in the company and innovate internally, dooms to fail because they don't really deal too good with the processes or with the corporate mentality.
So Nimrod, when you're examining a pitch, what are you looking for in terms of the people? Forget about it's assuming it's great technology. What are your key determinants?
I think that everybody would say so, and we have here some of the mentors of the industry like Remy Peres and others that, we learn from how to sort companies. But one thing we know, the manpower is more important than anything else, certainly in an early stage company. Technology would change a few times, the business model would change. Sometimes even the assumptions that we have when we made the investments would change. If we really have the people we can count on, that's a company to build on. Many times we passed on investments because the people were not right, and many times we took an investment, as John were indicating. If a serial entrepreneur is coming to you and you know this is the person who has the kind of skills to build a company, go bet on them. Even if you don't make 100% sure about the idea. But what makes them good entrepreneurs? In Israel, we'll make 2 phone calls immediately to someone who was with them in the army, someone who is there with the last company, and ask for kind of like vouching and recommendation. And you don't have second chance to, to repair your reputation in Israel. So keep your reputation. We'll make the phone calls. We'll make sure how they handle actually time of difficulty. Many companies will have some times of difficulty that they'll have to do some strategic turnover or change. We'll try to address these questions. We'll try even in discussions with them, many discussions, they sometimes don't understand why they come again and again to the VC to talk about the company. They feel that, okay, we explain about the product. we ask them about the product and about the assumptions to try to see how they handle the questions, the dynamic between the team members, how they can actually handle some challenges and difficulties or disagreement. We focus a lot of kind of like these reactions when trying to evaluate whether they have the right mentality to be entrepreneurs.
Okay. So let's deal with the last internal thing, which is failure. You can't have innovation without failure. You know, it's the old story of the scrambled eggs. I used to have a professor at Stanford who said that a learning organization was a myth because the only people who ever learnt anything were the ones who tried and failed, and then you fired them. No one who knew anything remains. So how do your organizations deal with failure?
I can start. I think it's critical to recognize that expectations have to be different based on the state of the innovation and really how you treat it as an organization. And I think one of the benefits we gained from developing this strategic initiatives or innovation organization was that we could set different expectations. And that was critical to giving them the freedom to not feel the pressure to sign the first customer before they were ready, or bring something out that had a lot of problems and challenges, or maybe they weren't certain about the technology. So within that organization, there is a lot of freedom in terms of ideating and building prototypes and really determining whether they move beyond that stage into something that we look to take to the market and productize. And we have a lot of failures, and I think that knowing and understanding the failures is just as critical as actually having a list of successes. And actually having people that have been through that process and failed means that they know where they went wrong, and then the next time they address it in a different way. So I think it's not perfect. I mean, you always want to be able to generate revenue from some of these product ideas and bring them to market before they're ready because you see demand. But you know, recognizing that the expectations need to be different, I think, is critical.
Kevin?
Yeah, I think, again, it's different in a larger company. The first thing is, you know, you need to just not be working in isolation, so don't fail on your own. Which means, as part of a process, you need to be informing which part of the organisation you're working on, so that there's no surprises. So that's the first thing. The second thing, it's not a bad thing to fail. I think we've gone through that quite a bit. The biggest issue, especially in large companies, before I get to the biggest issue, there's a second piece first, and that is it needs to be isolated. So obviously if it's a little thing, it doesn't matter, and it fails, it doesn't matter. But we're involved in multi-billion-dollar investments, so you don't want that to fail and become a surprise. So you need to be able to isolate some of these things. But the biggest thing in a large corporate is when to call it a failure and when to terminate the project. That is a really big deal because big companies tend to drift. You make a decision, you invest, and then you move on to other things, and you just let this thing go. And it can cost you hundreds of millions of dollars, in fact, billions of dollars. So the big deal, I think, in big corporates is within whatever it is to know when to call it a day and move on.
Okay. Nimrod, do you have any views on corporate failure?
I think that it became hype to speak about how we celebrate failures and we love failures, and to be honest, no one likes to fail. And in corporates, more than any other place, you're being punished for failing. So I agree with your Stanford professor. And I think, even to be honest, in a VC, we most of the time fail. That's our business model. We invest in companies, 8 out of the 10 will fail, and the 2 that will succeed, we wish them to be such a great success that actually they will return more than the fund, many times the fund. But we deal with failure all the time. And if we don't have actually a mentality to recognize a failure, to be open about discussing whether we fail, whether you have I don't know if it's a process or a culture that you are open about the numbers, you're open about actually the stage of the company, you're open with other people. If you don't admit a failure, you are likely later on to lose the credibility. So for example, if I know that my company failed, and I'll try now to sell it to another investor, join the investment, they'll recognize that I wasn't honest about the numbers or wasn't honest about my assumptions, I lose my credibility. And same with the entrepreneurs. So we have this conversation from the beginning with the entrepreneurs. You are likely to fail. We're likely to fail together. We are likely in this process that we'll sometimes even think that we are failing even if we didn't fail. let's build a relationship that will be open about the numbers, about the stage of the company, about our assumptions. Only then we can build a culture that we can embrace the failures in kind of like an honest manner. And I haven't seen someone liking to fail. I just came back from giving a keynote in Tokyo, and I spoke about the startup nation and the idea that we'll give a chance to a serial entrepreneur, even if they fail, and sometimes just because they failed and they learned the experience. And they were sitting and they kind of like, they were shocked. Someone took money from the bank. He did not return the money to the bank. The product that he promised did not materialize. And he comes asking for money again. They couldn't believe that we really believe in this story.
I've just bought a Kickstarter like that. I know how they feel. We've got 5 minutes left. I was going to move on to outsourcing innovation, but in a way that's kind of the easy part. So we'll leave that for the last minute if we still got time. But what I'd really like to ask the three of you is, I'm going to say pick one innovation that your company or your fund has produced, one that you're really proud of, that you think that this is the best thing that Cisco, Amdocs, or JVP have invested in. I'll let Nimrod start because it's probably easy for him.
I think that that's a brilliant. I shouldn't get the credit. It's my partner, Yoav Zruia, who is a much smarter person, actually picked this company. But this was brilliant. He looked at a professor in the university called Amir Averbuch, who is a genius in mathematics, and he recognized he was working on a solution for prostate cancer. Nothing to do with anything we know of. But apparently with this prostate cancer, he was able to go on big data with kind of like all medical records and indications about patients, records that he understood nothing about, but were able with graph mathematics and only with pure mathematics to come to understand an anomaly. That something is anomalous in the numbers and it's a good indicator of a prostate cancer. So he was actually taking data sets that he had no clue about the information within them or the parameters, but through actually graph theory, he was able to reduce many dimensions into one answer, whether it's an anomalous situation or not, and indicate prostate cancer. My partner recognized that that same technology would apply to cybersecurity. Actually, if you take information of a power plant or something which is very complex, tells all information about the power plant, sometimes thousands of parameters, without any knowledge, pre-knowledge about what parameters really matter, and take them into this algorithm and turn them into a result. This is an anomaly you should investigate. That makes sense. We took the license from Tel Aviv University and from Yale University, where his partners was working. We took it, and in 3 months, actually, we demonstrated with GE that we're able to find anomalies, operational anomalies, in large nuclear power plants. So it was turning a technology from one field to another, and now actually the company celebrated something like $40 million in funding. They're worth more than 100 million just after 2 years later.
What's that company called, Nimrod?
Tetaray.
Thanks. You two ready to give your one?
I'll give it a go. Yeah, about 6 years ago, Cisco wasn't in the compute space, and you would have heard about blade servers. And it's an interesting analogy. If you look at networking, the two key challenges are I/O, how you get information in and out of a network quickly, and two is how you manage the network. And what we saw was the same problem with compute. It wasn't so much do you have the right cores and processing power. It was literally how do you get the information in and out of a processor, and how do you manage the processes. So when we came out with what's called the unified computing system about 6 years ago, it wasn't another blade server. It was a re-architecture of compute. That was 6 years ago. Today we're either number one or two in the world in compute, selling well over a few $1 billion of servers to. So that's been very successful.
Right.
I think the easy thing would be to say that the company I came from that was acquired was a great, profound success, but I think that's maybe stretching it a bit. I think one of the recent innovations that I'm probably most passionate about that I've seen happen at Amdocs was really how they embraced the evolving telecoms market around digital. And I think that as we look at the challenges our customers, which are service providers, are facing, they're really looking at how they can transform their business. And what's fascinating is that, we've seen a lot of different industries go to digital. I mean, everyone does online banking. Everyone buys their flight tickets from the web. You don't talk to travel agents anymore. But for telecom service providers, actually, the move to digital has been very slow. So there's still huge traffic going into the call centers, and it's kind of ironic that the telecoms industry is the industry that enables digitization for all of these other industries. And so I think at Amdocs we recognized that the approach to digital had to be a really a multifaceted approach. It had to be bringing in the right partners in the ecosystem to drive innovation for the service providers. We couldn't build it all in-house, but it also meant that we had to fundamentally change and shift our approach and innovate around some new products and technologies to move traffic out of the call centers, to move them to the online channels. And so I think for me what stands out about that was that it was a collaborative approach between the partner ecosystem that was bringing some new technologies to drive agile development and time to market and digital innovation, and then us innovating around core products to enable the service providers to move to digital.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're out of time, and I'm getting the hurry up here. So I'd like to thank Kevin, Shannon, and Nimrod for a very stimulating discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.